if the consumer does not have tax liability, right, which is really actually pretty rare. It does happen. Oftentimes people say, no, they're retired. They don't have tax. They're on Social Security. That doesn't mean they don't pay taxes. Let's just be clear. In some cases, yes. Some cases, no. But the consumer will know for sure whether or not they pay taxes. If there's no tax liability, then the loan might not be the right product for them, right? Unless they really want to own it. Likewise, if they do, then the PPA might not be the right product for them, especially if over a 25-year period of time, they're paying $5,000, $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 more because of that escalator. If you're an attorney general and you sit down and say, well, Mrs. Johnson, did they explain to you that the product that they sold you, that power purchase agreement, that you were going to be paying $7,000 more than if this other option that was available? Did they explain that to you? She says no. Attorney generals are going to come back pretty irritated and they're going to start looking at that company and the training practices. And if the answer is, well, we only train on the easiest thing, not what's best for the consumer, you're going to get hammered.
What's up, everybody? This is Sam Taggart with the DDD podcast, and I've got one of our favorite podcasts that we've done in the solar space back because that podcast did so well. We decided to kind of dive a little bit deeper, and we have Paul Stephan on this one. And before I dive in, a couple little announcements. So we have Business Bootcamp monthly in Utah. We've got the bucket list trip in Africa, August 7th through the 17th. So if you're somebody who wants to apply for that, let us know. We're going cage diving and I'm segueing this because Paul was like, wait, what? How do I do that? And so we take high vibe people on epic stuff 2 weeks. And whenever this comes out, March, we're doing a heli skiing in Canada. And anyway, so it's funny because we're going to segue on this concept of cage diving with great whites in talking in this podcast in the solar space about talking about what's to come and the dangers in the solar space if we don't get ahead of it. And so Paul Stephan, he is one of the 5 principals at GoodLeap, been there 15 years, and he's the chief business development officer. And guys, when you're doing, they're doing $1 billion a month in revenue, and 50% of the solar loans comes from GoodLeap. And so they have like a really strong pulse on the marketplace, and also just keep their head on the, ear to the ground as far as what's going on with interest rates, with what's going on with, everybody complains about dealer fees and interest rates, and then attorney generals and this and that. And so we just want to kind of ad lib dive in to what the landscape of 2023 and 2024 could look like. And welcome to the show again, man.
Thanks, bud. I appreciate it. I'm so glad to be here. Always honored to hang out with Sam. Well,
I love these virtual hangouts. One of these times we'll have to do like real hangouts. So let's talk about this. So I posted something that got like 20,000 views on Instagram, and it was how Georgia is like really diving into the bad apples of solar. It's like we opened up Georgia and everybody raced there, and then did all these blitz trips and this and that. And there wasn't really any that good installers there. And now you're seeing, news articles come out and they're like, hey, I got screwed. I'm paying 2 bills, XYZ. So, where in the US have we started to see some of this repercussions of maybe some deceptive sales practices or, just bad operations? We've seen a few companies go out of business and some big lawsuits happening. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, you nailed it. And it's not just one, unfortunately. I mean, the entire industry as a whole right now is seeing some market compression. There's lots of different reasons, in my opinion, why we're seeing that. But we are obviously seeing a spike in installer insolvency. I mean, you just touched on that. We won't name names, but there's a couple of big companies that have gone out. And unfortunately, when they go out of business, they leave orphan customers. Those customers oftentimes don't know who to turn to. If they feel like they've been duped or something's been misrepresented, or they're just scared, they typically will reach out to the channels they have. And attorney generals tend to be one of those channels. And in many cases, the lawmakers don't have a clear understanding for the solar industry. And so they hear it from one point of view. And then obviously they're going to do their investigations as we would expect. But yeah, you touched on it. I think if you Google right now, Sam, attorney generals and solar, you would see North Carolina, Tennessee, Iowa, Georgia, California, and those are ones just on the top of my head. And so no one attorney general lives in a bubble. So when you see one or two or three, all of them start to pay attention and they start to look at, okay, well, how does this impact my state? What do I need to dig in? What do I need to look at? And if we call them regulators, let's just call attorney generals, licensing bureaus, let's put everybody in the regulatory bucket for the sake of this conversation. Regulators taking a hard look at our industry and its practices. There's three big things that I would say from my vantage point, and thank you for the introduction. It's really only beneficial because we see so much of the volume. We just have a great vantage point to advise, and that's the sort of the pulpit here that I would speak from. The three main things that we're seeing right now are PTO timelines are being scrutinized, M1 payments, and attorney generals understanding those, and then the last one is long-term consumer savings, what was sold to the consumer, and really they're honing in on PPA versus loan and what provides the best economic solution for the consumer. So those are the three big ones that we're seeing right now, and I think that lenders, installers, dealers, salespeople, everyone in between is all starting to experience a little bit of pressure, candidly, around those, right? So let me start with number one. Okay? I think that there's a good place to start with PTO timelines. So if you're a lender, and I can obviously speak from experience in this vantage point, is lenders as a whole, whether you're an institutional lender, something that's called a takeout investor, which is just someone who buys the loans after they've been originated. And that can happen in asset-backed security markets or, whole loan sales. I won't bore the audience with all the finance jargon, but ultimately people that buy those assets, institutional lenders, as I mentioned, takeout investors, anybody who's buying that asset, they're really paying a lot of attention right now to the PTO timelines for reasons we can all understand. The consumer has gotten their system installed. They're waiting for it to be active. In some cases, they're making two payments. You touched on this. It's really, really important. And so they really want to understand that. And as an industry, we need to see those timelines start to compress a little bit. And so getting the heat from regulators is one thing. I know we all have a desire to shorten those timelines. And the industry's sort of been built. And hey, listen, financiers, we all play our part in this. If you're receiving 100% of your payment at install, and that's how you drive in your revenue, you're probably putting most of your resources towards revenue generating activities. So we totally get, we all play a part in why we are where we are. The good news is what we're seeing on our platform from our vantage point is between 70 and 80% of our business right now is coming from installers that are reaching those PTO timelines of 100 days or less. So we want to see 90. 90 is sort of the sweet spot within the industry, but we're seeing a large percentage that are already there. So we're really just starting to address some of the edge case stuff. And I think I think if everybody starts to focus in on those things, then I think the regulators will relax a little bit. And here's the other thing, to be fair, it's not all us. Like the utilities play a really, really big part in this, and how quickly that they're granting PTO. Are they dragging their feet? We all know in some markets, we have a problem with the utilities there. So one of the things that GoodLeap is doing is in conjunction with other leaders within the space, we're exploring policy changes. So the policy changes that we're digging into through our efforts would require utilities to speed up all the interconnection processes. And the good news is we've got some momentum, but as is always the case, when you're talking about policy, we need everybody's involvement to create that pressure. So I think there's pressure coming, as I mentioned, but there's dual ownership. The takeaway for the audience, PTO timelines have to come back down. 90 days is sort of the sweet spot. 70 to 80% of what we see on our platform are already within that sweet spot, within 100 days. And if you're outside of that, just know that regulators are looking at this and they're compressing those timelines down to 90.
That's interesting. And, so let's like break this down to like a rep level. I'm selling solar. Common things that reps are going to not understand. I'm 6 months new, 3 months new, and I'm like, where's my money? Or where's my, install? Or where's my, I think this is where, to bring this into layman's terms, it's like, people need to realize that there's a financial economics, there's releasing of funds to a company, and then those funds get released to a sales rep. So let's just talk about like even just the M1 change that we've recently started to see and will continue to see. If I was running a dealership and I'm solely dependent on, hey, once the installer gets their M1, they're going to portion off a majority of that to just keep me alive because I'm a sales organization, and that's going to take a lot of the revenue. Well, to keep me paying my reps, I've got to pay them off of that M1 to keep them working, right? To keep them alive. But if I'm not getting M1s and I'm getting all of my funding at PTO, how does that affect down to the sales rep level, down to the dealer level, and the install level from a cash flow and business perspective?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the good news is, I think you nailed it at a high level. I think the good news is contractors are paid almost always now at install, not PTO. So that PTO timeline that we're talking about is, hey, people have received their money. Now it's about making sure the consumer gets what they expected and that the utility is moving as quickly as possible. So getting those two things done. But you made a really nice dovetail into upfront payments and how it ultimately impacts our industry. And so there's this, I mean, you nailed it. Construction projects take time. Salespeople need to stay alive, right? I'm a lifelong salesperson. And so, commissions need to be paid at some point in the process, right? If they get paid too soon, we know that comes with risk. If they get paid too late. So finding that also has risk. So if we find that sweet spot, I think we're in a good place. But, the where we're seeing scrutiny from regulators right now are M1 payments as a whole. So a prime example is seen in California. If you look at the California Contractors State License Board, the CSLB, they just recently ruled that contractors cannot accept more than 10% of the contract price or $1,000, whichever's less. That's an important part of that sentence, whichever's less, as a down payment on a home improvement contract, and that includes solar energy. Contractor cannot request or accept any progress payments. So that's really what we're talking about right there, is a progress payment exceeding the value of work performed or materials delivered on a home improvement contract. So that was a lot of verbiage. Let me compress that.
Yeah.
The CSLB, the agency that runs licensing in California, one of the largest markets in the nation, has come back and said, hey guys, you cannot receive M1 payments unless you can prove to us that the amount that you're receiving does not exceed the value of the work performed or the materials delivered.
Which really, it's permit fee and scheduler. You know what I mean? It's like a site surveyor. You had a site surveyor and a permitter, and that's it.
Right. And so you nailed it. You might define it that way. I might define it something different. I might say, well, the salesperson is part of that, that work performed. And so maybe I can include that. What you and I, or even what the contractors would think would be fair, is actually irrelevant. It comes down to what they can negotiate as an installer, what you can negotiate as an installer through your CSLB rep. So for installers in California, this can severely limit cash flow if you're not buttoned up and you're not working hand in hand with the CSLB to ensure that you're compliant. That's the takeaway.
And this is what happened to a client of mine, just barely. Their installer or their supplier, CED, says, hey, we're not going to give you as big of a line of credit, so we need our payments on our panels. So then the banks are like, hey, we can't pay as big of M1s because of what you just said. And now they're up a creek without a paddle because they're fronting their future jobs with past jobs, right? So it's this, I think as a business owner, we don't think of cash flow is the game, right? So it's that kind of this game of like, how do you balance overhead and spend to make sure that you're not putting yourself upside down, especially when you're in a place where it's like, you can only get up to $1,000 or you can only, whatever. And it's like, I think unfortunately the days of just kind of like go out and be a glorified sales rep and, be happy once you get that install, like it's just this fast, like quick cash game. It's hurting. Like, I think people have to look at it like, no, you've got to ensure this thing goes all the way to PTO, because then you're going to have customers calling and being like, what the freak, I'm getting 2 bills and I haven't even had this thing turned on. Or their loan defaulting. It's like, we haven't even like, they have to go reapply them, and then their credit's different. And then they don't even get the same loan that they got sold on. That happened to me one time. And I was like, wait, what? I can't sell them even though they've been sold, even though, and now you have to go find a different financier option. I think people, they don't talk about this stuff enough. And it's kind of sad. Like I just had a company I heard of not pay, I think it was like 50 to 60 reps. And what happened is they were installing all before permits. Oh. And so they were just 3-day, 4-day installs. So talk to me, like, what's some of the repercussions you could see when people start trying to cut corners like that?
Yeah, I mean, we know, right? So for me, it always comes down to the health of a business long term. Okay. And so I think what you've described as cash flow is a regulator, a normal regulator in all businesses. And so you can never put yourself in jeopardy by outrunning your cash flow, right? That's like a normal business tenet. And so where we've seen some people get in trouble is the idea for them was volume, growth at all costs. Let's enter new markets. And I understand, because, if you look, Sam, where we've been as an industry for the last 3, 4, 5, 10 years, even, it's really been kind of explosive growth. Interest rates were flat. There wasn't a lot of volatility in the market. And so it allowed people to extend themselves a little bit. Well, none of us expected Powell and the Fed to make some of the moves that they've made as aggressively as they have. And so that's created some volatility within the market. That volatility is starting to expose some folks that maybe were running really, really lean P&Ls or don't have the balance sheet that they need to sustain that level of growth. That's where people get caught. And so that level of growth really comes with what you're talking about, is paying salespeople. And then they rush and, hey, let's get jobs installed. We'll wait, I need my cash flow. So we'll get jobs installed before permits. Like, holy cow, are we doing it the wrong way at that point, right? Like, that sort of becomes the beginning of the end. The key takeaway, I think, and you really touched on this earlier really, really well. If we don't fundamentally self-regulate as an industry, we are in essence asking and telling the regulators, come in and regulate for us, create rules. Well, the people that are going to come in, attorney generals and others, don't understand the industry as well as you do, or I do, or anyone that's in this industry that's watching this right now. We are the best to regulate this business. We don't want outside interests coming in because they don't understand. And if anybody that's watching this was ever in the mortgage space, back in the mortgage space prior to 2010, the economic downturn that we had there, and the regulation that was born from that is something called Dodd-Frank. If you're in the mortgage space, you just cringed when I said Dodd-Frank, because it is over-regulation that has really stifled the mortgage industry's ability to grow. We have to self-regulate to make sure that no one comes in and creates a Dodd-Frank for solar, because it'll really limit our growth. So this comes down, and listen, I'm a lifelong sales leader, and so it's not always crystal clear. But for the better part of the last 15 years, what I've focused on is, how do we do things ethically? How do we do things right? You nailed it. How do we not cut corners? Because when you cut corners, you're turning what should be a marathon into a sprint. Let me sprint for the next mile or 2 miles. Look, we're all in this for the long haul. This needs to be a marathon. So cutting corners does nothing other than jeopardize your future and the future of the other contractors around you, and your salespeople and the installers and site owners.
No, but we should resurrect. I mean, that's why, not resurrect, but like, we need to get more gas on the DDD Association. The concept of when we founded the DDD Association, it was a nonprofit association designed to help bring a community together to then go fight legislation and utility. Because if it's like, okay, GoodLeap, it's like, well, okay, why doesn't, and then you got Sunrun, and then you got couple of these big players that really do put allocation and money behind it because they have it. But it's like, how does a 30-man company go up against a utility company? Like, they don't even like try. But I'm like, hey, if you could put in 10 grand or 20 grand or 50 grand or whatever, and we got 1,000 little companies to all put in 50 grand, and you've got some of these big companies that have resources and attorneys and, connections. So like we hunted down, like, for example, we already met with the Attorney General of Utah and some other big players of just saying, like, how do we help lobby in the positive direction? But it's like, at the same time, like, I just had a call on Monday with the guy named Danny Pickett out of Arizona, and he's really going to try to help take this on a little bit more. But that's the whole concept. So I'd love to be a part or help consolidate some teams and resources to help obviously advocate in the right direction. And so we created like the sales assessment that basically certifies against deceptive sales practices. So if you're somebody that wants to go get certified by the DD Association, you can go to ddassociation.com, take the test, the quiz, and it kind of walks you through, here's like licensing laws, sales practices to avoid, things like that. But we need to add like the solar specific section to that, simply to just show, from a tax credit fraud to a, there's like 5 or 6 things off the top of my head. I'm like, every solar rep in the planet that's knocking a door needs to do this. Just like how and that's why we started the DD Association. It was like, you had realtors need to get certified and have a license, and they can have their license revoked in order to sell real estate. A mortgage guy, same thing. Insurance guy, same thing. So like, if we could self-regulate and create the solar sales certification license that is then required, and that's one of the reasons why I tell every company I have DDD University, is because we're trying to teach, like, here's how to sell it the right way. You know what I mean? And I think it's sad when I had friends go to Texas with a company, I'm not going to say names, but they came back and they're like double charging. They're double building a 2-time system because they were told that the homeowner is going to get a buyback and a credit at the end of the year for, 3,000 or double their, like, they'll make money by adding extra panels. Well, I'm like, no, you just wanted a bigger system to make a bigger commission, and you just screwed over that homeowner. And whatever you just said was completely false. And I'm like, the fact that that's happening, this is disheartening. And those people shouldn't have a license. Like, they should have a jury or a probation, like a counsel that says, hey, sorry, like, we've caught you on multiple offenses to do XYZ, you lost your license. And I think there will be a day in either door to door as a whole or solar specific, because of such high contract values, just like annuities and life insurance has such a high contract value. You know what I mean? I think that there's an element that this could go that route. And like you're saying, self-regulating is much, much better. When all the AGs come at you and say, well, yeah, none of them were accredited by the association, nor went through the certification processes, hit on those guys, not the ones that are going through it the right way. But if there is no uniform platform that people can come to put people down that path, then yeah, they're going to force whatever. They're going to make it up. So I think that's important to talk about. Like, I mean, that was the whole mission of the DD Association. So I'd love to get you guys involved in some sort of fashion, like, or take it over, or like, it's nonprofit. Like, I just do it because I think it's needed.
Yeah, listen, you nailed it. Look, there's bad actors in every industry, right? And so, but I think it's their edge case, right? It's a very small percentage of salespeople. I mean, my experience, the largest group I ever ran was 4,000 salespeople, another 2,500 support. And I could count on, probably one hand, the number of bad actors that were intentionally bad actors. To your point, it really comes down to they were trained incorrectly. They don't understand. We'll talk about loan versus PPA, right? That was the one thing we always used to battle. But if we can just get certification, self-regulate, and make sure people are trained appropriately, I mean, think about what's happened with the tax credit, right? Getting it extended. Like, we have a decade plus of green fields within this industry. Now, there's definitely challenges, but what we're starting to see really is the industry mature, right? It's a young industry, and the things that we're talking about right now are really natural. They happen in every growth industry, every emerging market. If there's not a ton of regulation, you start to see some of the wobble that we're starting to see right now. So the takeaway is, let's get in front of it, whether you're a salesperson, you're a business owner, whatever your role is in this space, there's ownership there. And to your point, there's strength in numbers. If you sit back and say, well, how am I going to educate an attorney general? You're going to join a much larger group with a much larger voice, a much louder voice. And then together, we will make sure they understand this industry, the ethics of the people that are on this, me and you and everyone behind, whether it's some of the company names that you mentioned, it's 99% of the people are highly ethical and do things for the right reason. So we weed out the 1% and we make sure that the other 99% that our voice is heard. So sign me up. We'll talk more about the certification and how to do those things. But, the last thing that I wanted to touch on, Sam, and I think you teased it, was within the self-regulation, the hot button is always, what was the customer sold and why were they sold that?
Yes.
And this is where training is so important. So I can tell you, when I started in the space, there was no loan. So I'm not going to tell you how many years ago that was, but it was more than 10. And so, we sold leases and PPAs. And I remember the PPA when it first came out. I remember what the pitch was, right? We all know this one, right?
Only 2.9% increase year over year. It's guaranteed. You don't have to worry about it.
You're paying 14 cents kilowatt hour now. I can get you your electricity 13 cents. Why wouldn't you do that, right? It's that simple. And in some cases, people didn't even talk about that escalator, right? So here's what happens. Now, salespeople lock in with me on this one because this one is really important. And I've had this conversation at least 100 times. If you're PPA is easy to sell. And oftentimes when you're new in the space, you will only be trained on a PPA. I've heard this before. Hey, look, they're brand new. They're new to knocking doors. I don't want to freak them out.
Yeah.
Right. I don't want to teach them everything. I just teach them the PPA. Cool. Understand this. If you're a regulator and you sit down with grandma and you say, hang on a second, let me understand this. Or you sit down with, a young single mother or whatever the demographic is that's going to irritate attorney generals. And you say, let me understand the side-by-side economics of a 25-year PPA versus a 25-year loan. How much will you pay for this period of time? How much will you pay for the first 5 years, long-term overall? If you're a salesperson and you don't understand those economics and you don't understand what you're actually selling to that client, shame on you. That is step one. You have to become an expert at your craft and what you sell. And so highlight very, very quickly is if the consumer does not have tax liability, right, which is really actually pretty rare. It does happen. Oftentimes people say, no, they're retired. They don't have tax. They're on Social Security. That doesn't mean they don't pay taxes. Let's just be clear. In some cases, yes. Some cases, no. But the consumer will know for sure whether or not they pay taxes. If there's no tax liability, then the loan might not be the right product for them, right? Unless they really want to own it. Likewise, if they do, then the PPA might not be the right product for them, especially if over a 25-year period of time, they're paying $5,000, $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 more because of that escalator. If you're an attorney general and you sit down and say, well, Mrs. Johnson, did they explain to you that the product that they sold you, that power purchase agreement, that you were going to be paying $7,000 more than if this other option that was available? Did they explain that to you? She says no. Attorney generals are going to come back pretty irritated and they're going to start looking at that company and the training practices. And if the answer is, well, we only train on the easiest thing, not what's best for the consumer, you're going to get hammered. Right? We saw this. We saw this many, many times when my team was selling at our high point 23,000 sales per month. We had a ton of regulation. We had a ton of internal processes, and we would go and inspect these things. And these are the things that we would ultimately internally hammer each other on. And so, if we give that power to an attorney general and we don't understand the M1 piece, the TPO piece, and also now the selling what is right, we give up. We create a lot of risk for ourselves in this space, and we give up the opportunity to self-regulate.
So my very first year is 2015 in solar, and I got in, and I remember I started in Utah, and it was pretty early in Utah. Like solar wasn't like a big thing there. And I was like, you can't sell in Utah. It's terrible, blah, blah, blah. You're selling a loan. I was like, that's all we got here is a loan. And I think Vivint Solar had been here for a little bit, and they were selling a lease. They invented like a 9-cent lease or something that they obviously didn't make any sense economically or something. I don't know. And I remember meeting with a really high up person, I'm not gonna say name, but owns a massive, massive company. And he's like, you're doing a disservice to the homeowner to sell them a loan. And I was like, how in your right mind do you say that? And we got in this 45-minute debate because I was new. He's like, you don't know anything. You've never been to, you're new to this thing. You're like, you'll learn. And I was like, I'm just looking at straight spreadsheets, bro. Like, I don't even know how you look at an escalator of 3% and you look at these numbers and I'm like, I'm looking at what you're selling it at. And I just like ran all the numbers. I'm like, I wouldn't buy that. I'd buy the loan. And so he's just like, I was like, all right, we can agree to disagree. Like, all right, see you later. And he was trying to recruit me, right? He was like trying to sell me on going somewhere and selling and working with them. And anyway, I just vividly remember that conversation. And I'm like, what would I get? And, I don't lease my car and I own my car. And some people, I guess it makes sense, but I'm like, if this is even like, I don't lease my house for 25 years. I want to own it and then resell it. Like, I was like, anyway, so it was just funny. Like you made me think of when I first started, loans were so in their infancy and I was such the advocate because I was like, guys, there's equity value in the home. There's actual like a tangible thing here. So
yeah. So listen, I mean, obviously, I'm a supporter of the loan in general. I believe it to be a better product for a vast majority. However, like from a credibility standpoint, right? Like let's forget that. Like I got to come clean. Like what I do for a living is really heavily focused on providing consumers with what I believe is the right product. That's it. I don't care if it's a loan. I don't care if it's a PPA. Whatever the consumer walks away with and says, that was the right product for me, I don't regret the decision. That's what needs to be sold. Right. This is not a volume play or a market grab. This isn't let's soft serve why the loan is better or why the PPA is better. I don't know which one's better because I don't know which consumer we're talking about.
Yeah.
The salesperson has to understand that and be able to articulate and let the consumer choose, or salesperson chooses for them, knowing that they've pulled the right information out of the consumer and they are getting the right product. But boy, if we don't do that right, Sam, that unfortunately others are going to come in and start making those decisions for us, which is catastrophic.
Yeah. No, guys, if you're listening to this, I think the big takeaways, in my opinion, are one, understand the from top to bottom sale, like your start a sale, right? Like if you're the sales guy, you're start of that, but there's all the operations that go into getting it installed, then interconnection and PTO, and that process, and then the banks, how they deal with that, and understanding kind of that all that process as a sales rep is important to know. For one, to avoid your own frustration. Two, to clearly communicate timelines and expectations with the customer. And three, as you move into management or you have an owner that's like, hey, we're in a cash crunch. Like I unfortunately didn't understand that when I got into solar. And I was bitching because none of us were getting paid. I left the company, took 80 sales reps with me because nobody was getting paid. And I just realized that I imploded the company. And we did 10, they were doing 10 a month and we brought them up to 130 a month, our third month in. And they were like, we have no money. You know what I mean? Like to go grow at that rate, they were fronting the capital to fund commissions. And then all of a sudden they have no money. And I'm over here like, pay us, we're selling, we're killing it. And it created a massive frustration. And to the point where relationships burnt, lawsuits happening. I sue them. I'm like, well, I have to sue you to get my own money. Like, and it was, it's just, I think a lot of people don't see that side or understand it. So just go in there, eyes open, and educate yourself there, and then do it the right way. And even if you don't know if you're doing it the right way, go find a credible source to teach you to do it the right way. I mean, that's why we have DDDU. That's why, for us, it's educate. And unfortunately, the person you're learning from might not be the right one to learn from. And, that's not all the cases, but it's important to know, and it's up to you, because I want everybody listening to this to have a clear conscience walking out of that house best case scenario, you know what I mean? Like, and some of the things might be out of your control, whether it gets held up in permitting and takes longer than 100 days, like he's saying, or whatever. But like, I hope that everybody listening to this is doing it with the utmost integrity, because as a collective, as a tribe, it's what is going to avoid, like you said, you know, outside regulators coming in and enforcing dumb red tape that, like, you know, it's just like, look at COVID. Outside regulators go force restaurants and go force upon, you need to follow these stupid policies or else we're going to shut you down. And it's like, nobody wants another COVID in the solar industry, though. It's like, that'd be so annoying.
Yeah, there's so many examples that we can pull from, right? And so here's what we've talked about. So we've talked about, you know, PTO timelines and the compression there, and that really is very healthy for the organization, for the industry, and for each organization to compress those timelines. And so we need the focus from the installers to be there. We need the focus from the utilities to be there, and we need understanding from consumers and everyone throughout the process. But that timeline has to compress. Likewise, the amount of time it takes to get from sale to install has to compress, so salespeople can get paid quicker. The healthiest thing for the market, we're not ready for it yet, I don't think, but the healthiest thing for the market is salespeople get paid at install, and install happens very quickly. I'm gonna make up a number, 2 weeks after approval, or 30 days. And I know good everybody wants that, right? We're all hoping for that. And then 90 days later, we reach PTO. I think if the industry eventually, over time, and maybe it takes us years to get there, but I think if the industry gets there, we have a fundamentally a healthier industry. We don't need outside regulation. We're compressing the timelines. Consumers, you know, their first payment in many cases is due 90 days after they sign their loan docs, or I'm sorry, after it installs. Their first payment is due. So if we can get to PTO within that 90-day timeline, hey, there's no dual payment and contractors don't have to reimburse. You know, there's all those other things. But listen, what we've talked about is 2023 and the challenges associated with 2023, but they're not all challenges. Like, there's a lot of really good reasons to be optimistic. Electricity rates have increased by about 16% across the nation year over year. So that's huge. So that's creating demand. Consumers are looking at their bills. They're really, really frustrated. So solar, great, much easier to sell in those situations when, you know, the utility bill went from $100 to 116 or 120 or whatever the case may be. Additionally, consumers are demanding greater energy resilience. Usually comes from winter storms, hurricanes, summer heat waves. Texas is a great market where I know we've seen a lot of boom over the last few years, but, you know, you have ice storms, you have these other things where people realize that they've been relying on an aging infrastructure, and taking control of their energy needs is very, very compelling, and it exceeds the desire to see savings sometimes, right? So that's optimism for sales. The 30% tax credit is locked in, as you know, so that's great. So that's creating more economic advantage. We're still in a place where approximately 4% of U.S. homeowners or homes have solar. And so while we're starting to see some pushback and some challenges with things like NEM policies, it's 4%. We are in still a largely untapped market that continues to educate. Again, in an environment where utility prices are going up, the incumbents are losing hold on the market, right? 30% tax credit, need for independence, energy independence, savings continue to be there. There's still a bunch of emerging markets. So, you know, from my perspective, yes, we're seeing some challenges in 2023. We need to get healthier. We need to do all the self-regulating that we've talked quite a bit about. But boy, the future for this space is so bright. So we just have to get this right. We have to get this right and make sure that we all, we're teaching our kids how to sell solar and knock doors and all those sorts of things, 10, 15, 20 years in the future. And we've got this. We can do this. I think with the things that you've talked about, coming together, taking individuals and turning them into a group, louder voice, door-to-door experts, GoodLeap, whoever it is, if we just come together, we educate, we make sure people are doing the right things, we speak with one united voice to the regulators, I think we're going to be in great shape.
Love that. Love that. Well, Paul, thanks for taking the time and really having the backbone to be like, hey, this is like, we stand up for the good. I like the people fighting the good fight. and appreciate the relationship. And guys, obviously GoodLeap, if you don't know who they are and you've not looked into them, and you're in solar, you're missing something. But love those guys. Awesome team on the back end, and phenomenal to see what they've done and pioneered in this space. So thanks for being on the show, and appreciate you guys listening. Appreciate the comments, the shares. More people in the solar space need to have this. So please share this and pass this along to the other fellow salespeople you have out there so that they can be on the same page. Thank you guys.